He produced a film with the title Seal Island. And since it was a true story, he decided to call it a true life adventure. It won an Academy Award. And with that, Walt was off into a whole new domain, the world of nature.
Welcome back to Disney Marvels for a week of December 1st, 2019. This is episode 65. Disney Marvels, the show about Disney, Marvel, Lucasfilm, Muppets, Pixar, Fox, the parks, and much, much more. If it has to do with Disney, it's fair game. I'm your host, Matthew Graken. Whether you're planning your next Disney park vacation, cruise vacation, or you just don't know where to start, do what I do. Contact my friends at Destinations with Character Travel, the official travel partner of the Disney Marvel podcast. Email them now at info@destinationswithcharacter.com or visit their website at www.destinationswithcharacter.com. And be sure to tell them that the Disney Marvels podcast sent you for a special gift. Stay tuned to after the show to find out exactly the detail, what kind of gift you can get, and get all that information again. Now, for the news. Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, the first ride-through attraction with Mickey and Minnie Mouse, will open at Disney Hollywood Studios on March 4th, 2020. Summer of 2020, also discover what Chef Remy's cooking up at Epcot's France Pavilion at Remy's Ratatouille Adventure. Disney will be producing a new DuckTales World Showcase Adventure coming to Epcot. I just said that. Where you go in search of Price's Treasure with Scrooge McDuck, Donald, Launchpad, Webby, and of course Huey, Dewey, and Louie. With the help of the Play Disney Parks mobile app. There will be 3 new videos coming to Epcot. The 3 new movies. Awesome Planet, this 10-minute film showcase, showcases our planet's beauty and diversity and features stunning imagery, in-theater effects, and an original score from Oscar award-winning composer Steve Price. You can see Awesome Planet in the Land Pavilion. Beauty and the Beast Sing-Along. The Don Han producer of the animated and live-action Beauty and the Beast, directed and produced this film, which presents a brand new twist on the tale as old as time, as guests are invited to sing along. Angela Lansbury, who voiced Mrs. Potts in the original animated film, narrates the film, which will run in rotation in the France Pavilion with Impressions de France, which receives a 4K projection upgrade. Canada Far and Wide, Circle Vision 360. Over in the Canada Pavilion, the O Canada film gets an exciting update with new scenes, a new musical score by Canadian composer Andrew Lockington, and new narration by award-winning actor Catherine O'Hare and Eugene Levy. Space 220 Restaurant will debut this winter. No specific date is set at this time. It is the restaurant that will be located next to Mission Space. And in 2020, guests will say howdy in the new immersive restaurant that's coming to Toy Story Land at Disney's Hollywood Studio. Roundup Rodeo Barbecue Restaurant invites entire families into the Rootin' Tootin' Rodeo experience right in Andy's backyard. For more information, go to DisneyWorld.com. We'll be back after these short messages. And now, on with the show. So this week, as I think I've mentioned before, as an adoptive father, adoption has always been something on the forefront of my mind. And knowing that one of my heroes in life, Walt Disney, was an adoptive father, there was something I always wanted to find out more. But when he did, you didn't really talk about adoption. It was kind of like the dirty subject. But I figured there was one person I could turn to that would be able to find out the information I need to know. I could reach out to this person, and that was the one, the only, the man himself, Jim Hill. Jim, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, but let's be honest. The only reason I'm on here now is you couldn't get Jim Corcus, could you? So
I reached out to him, but for some reason the line was constantly busy.
Oh, there you go. Okay, that's across the street from every McDonald's is a Burger King, but that's okay. So
no.
Anyway, thanks for the invitation, and certainly again, you picked a fascinating topic that again, a lot of Disney history books or that sort of thing, they sort of skate around, but I think you nailed it. That you got to remember that adoption, especially back in the 1930s, was for some reason something you really didn't talk about. In fact, this very weird situation, the parents who the people who decided to do this, to give a kind and loving home to a very fortunate child, the emphasis back then was kind of placed in the fact that, well, you had to do this because you couldn't conceive a child on your own, and it was just sort of like, you're really not getting the important part here, that these people have opened their hearts and their homes and done this amazingly generous thing. And thank goodness now in 2019 the thinking is kind of turned around
for the most part. I mean, there's still that stereotype that unfortunately falls along. I mean, well, we won't mention the Country Bear movie, but I mean, even in Thor, they do poke a little joke at it. But or actually, no, Avengers. It was in the Avenger movie. But the eyes have been open to it.
And as they should be. Again, it's again this is this incredibly kind, generous thing, and more to the point, that the love they put out there and the kindness they put out there is returned tenfold through these amazing kids. So
absolutely. And like I said, it's a story that I've always wanted to find out a little more about. And as we were both doing our research, I think we found out a little more than we wanted to.
Yeah.
Everyone always knows about Diane. And Diane did this, and she started the family museum. Her husband ran the company for a while until that turned ugly. But they were very proactive in the company. And Sharon, even though she was half the inspiration to Disneyland and half the inspiration to most of Walt's earlier work, kind of disappeared through history, the Disney history, I feel.
Well, and there's an interesting reason for that. Walt himself, in fact, forgive me, again, this story takes some dark turns, but in order to understand why Walt did what he did with his kids, you have to understand that in March of 1932, Charles Lindbergh Jr. was kidnapped out of the Lindbergh family home. This was March of 1932. Some awful people actually got him into the second story nursery, kidnapped this child. There were several attempts at ransom, and eventually, in May of that same year, the body of this little boy was found just 4.5 miles away from the house. And, for somebody like Walt, who was this, face it, this is, 1933 is the year of Three Little Pigs. I mean, Snow White is on the horizon, but, at the same time, Walt's in the newsreels and, that sort of thing. His worry was that, if I put my kids in the front window, what's to, and put them in the spotlight, what's to prevent them from, suffering the fate of Charles Lindbergh Jr. So he was very, very, protective of his girls. And and the interesting thing is, I mean, he literally drove them to school himself every morning. He dropped them off, and then head over to the studio. He kept them out of the newsreels. He kept them out of the paper. In fact, the girls really don't start showing up. I want to say the 1952 television special, One Night in Wonderland, that sort of kicked off the whole Disney getting into the television thing.
Yes.
That was really one of the first times you actually got to see the girls. But he just, in fact, there's the famous story about, Diane had no idea what her dad did until one day she was at school and, your dad's Walt Disney. And she came home furious. It's like, tell me the truth. Are you Walt Disney? Like,
I remember hearing that story about her, that she really did. Yeah, it's like the person, your dad's Walt Disney. Well, yeah, he is, but not being able to connect what they were trying to get to.
Yeah, yeah, but anyway, to get back to the actual adoption story, you have to sort of understand that, Walt came from a biggish family. He had 3 brothers, Roy, Raymond, and Herbert, and 1 sister, Ruth, whereas his wife, Lily, came from a huge family. She was the youngest of 10 kids. And also kind of a tough life, that her dad died when she was just 17, and that she and her mom actually moved together to Southern California to try to have a better life for themselves. And, and then she ends up as, the secretary in charge of the ink and paint department and at a studio where Walt's working, and, sparks fly. And, so by July of 1925, they marry. And the plan was, given, both their family histories, they wanted to have a lot of kids.
Yeah. I know Walt believed in a big family. He loved
did.
the idea of a large family.
And, the irony is that he eventually got it. I mean, Diane had 7 kids.
Yeah.
And, and Sharon would go on to have 3 of her own. One of them, again, appropriately enough, adopted. And in fact, there's that famous cruise that they took the last summer that Walt was alive, 1966. I want to say it was up in Canada or thereabouts, but they had the whole family on this giant boat that Walt had rented, and he just loved being surrounded by all these small kids.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing, that's not what happened with Walt and Lilly. They had trouble conceiving. In fact, not to tell tales out of school here, but Lilly had a devastating series of miscarriages before Diane Mae Disney finally came along in December of 1933. And it had been kind of a horrific pregnancy. I mean, she'd been given what had happened previously with all the miscarriages. Lillian was horribly stressed out for the 9 months she was carrying Diane. She was in this constant state of fear that she wouldn't be able to carry this baby to full term. But
understandable, yeah.
Yeah. But Diane arrives hale and hearty again in December of 1933, and Walt and Lilly think that, okay, their dream of having a big family is now finally within their grasp. But then in 1934 and 1935, Lilly suffers another series of miscarriages, which is why at this point the Disney family doctor pulls the 2 of them aside and say, look, if you really want Diane to have a little brother or a little sister, you should probably consider adoption. And that's eventually what Walt and Lilly did. They reached out discreetly through the established channels, and just made those authorities know that they were looking for a second child. And then on December 21st, 1936, Sharon Mae is born. And 2 weeks afterwards, Walt and Lilly adopt this beautiful, healthy little girl. And okay, so we talked about, how he'd, he kept them out of the spotlight. But face it, well, Walt Disney is your dad. You have a different life than other kids.
Very different life.
I mean, this is a man who has resources that other people don't. Like, for example, I want to say it's Christmas of 1938. It's the year after Snow White has been released and become this monstrous hit. And the Disneys are now living at Walking Way in a 12-room French style home. And Walt decides that his little girl should have a playhouse in the background. But again, this is Walt Disney, who has a studio full of craftsmen who make this wonderful Snow White-like cottage with leaded windows and a running sink and a telephone that links back to the house, to the kitchen, so they can call in for milk and cookies. And he has the craftsmen make it, and not only make it, but when the girls go to bed on Christmas Eve, the craftsmen carry it into the backyard, finish building it, and when the girls wake up, this house has appeared overnight.
I have trouble sometimes just putting together a train table for my kids just overnight.
Well, if it's any consolation, Lilly Disney, who had, people don't really talk about it, she had a wonderfully weird sense of humor. And what delighted her on Christmas Day wasn't the little girl's reactions to this amazing, fanciful storybook house that had appeared overnight in their backyard. It was that after they inspected it, they immediately pivoted to the empty boxes that all of the presents had came in and began playing with those as if they were a train. And here's Walt standing in the backyard with the thing that he'd spent months trying to get built for his daughters, and they're playing with the cardboard boxes. But kids are kids are kids.
It just goes to show you it doesn't matter how much you spend on those kids or whatever you think you're getting them that's going to change their life. They still want the box. It's all about the box.
Well, it's exactly just what can you do? Now, Walt and Diane, oddly enough, had kind of a rough relationship. They were both willful and headstrong, and in fact, which is what you mentioned at the top of the show, or the top of the segment. Kind of ironic, given that Diane ended up launching the Walt Disney Family Museum to basically protect her dad's reputation. That there'd been that awful Mark Elliott book, The Dark Prince of Hollywood, and that was what sort of spurred her to, my dad wasn't, a communist. My dad, that whole museum is about defending him.
I think there was even a joke in one of the Simpsons episodes saying Walt Disney had the evil gene.
Well, yeah, and again, that's what kind of makes it interesting that they're on Disney Plus now. In fact, Did you see they are actually that they've been compiling stats for the first couple of weeks of the subscription streaming services, and the Simpsons are of the things people are downloading and watching. The Simpsons are like going back and forth between 2 and 3.
Really?
Yeah, no, that's people just can't get enough of The Simpsons in Disney in the same place.
It's the weirdest marriage. I mean,
they are, the folks at, in fact, can't really explain my sourcing here, but that was the interesting thing when Disney was debating whether or not they should actually put in a bid on 20th Century Fox and its film library and television library. The subject of The Simpsons came up because they have, as you mentioned, sometimes have been kind of hard on Disney. Mm-hmm. And so, Disney goes, okay, well, let's do a focus group and, find out what people think in regard to The Simpsons and Disney. And the response that came back was that this is bizarre. They people think of The Simpsons the same way they think of Disney, as in it's this realized world with all of these very vivid characters. I mean, think about it. When you start naming characters in The Simpsons, you run out of fingers and toes because that's how deep the cast is. And there's so many places that we know vividly, in much the same way, that we know Snow White's Cottage. We also know the Quickie Mart or Moe's Tavern or, and can immediately conjure up what those look like. And it's like, and the people who are in charge of the focus group, you don't get this. According to the people we're interviewing, it's a perfect fit. It's like, well, of course, The Simpsons and Disney belong together. And again, clearly with the launch of Disney Plus and the way, the people who are downloading 30 years of episodes, it was a great roll of the dice, and it worked out.
So let me get this straight. They finish up with the episode The Mandalorian, and then they head to Springfield.
I don't know what to tell you. I mean, that's, in fact, that was one of the more interesting things about the first 4 and 5 days of the operation of Disney Plus. The main complaint that they were getting from folks after I'm having trouble accessing my account was, I'm watching the first couple of seasons of The Simpsons, and you guys, because you wanted to make it have the consistent look with the later episodes that are letterboxed, you're cropping the episodes in such a way that we're losing gags because there's stuff in the upper part of the image that you cut for letterboxing. And Disney actually had to release a statement to the effect of, we are so sorry. We are working now by 2020. The Simpsons episode, the early Simpsons episodes, will be fully restored and returned to their original framing.
Someone's quickly hitting the undo button on the computers, trying to put everything back. Undo.
Some poor intern, just sort of hammering away there. So anyway, to get back to Sharon and Walt, I mean, again, so Diane and Walt have this headstrong relationship where Sharon is Walt's buddy. Walt actually loved to take daughter number 2 along with him on business trips, and Sharon loved to tell the story about one trip they took in August of 1947. That was especially memorable for Walt, if not her. So Sharon's 11 at this time, and she's school has ended in L.A. in June, and this is August, and Walt had hired these 2 wildlife photographers, Alfred and Elma Millett. I think I'm getting their right here. And had literally given them $100,000 and, said, go off for a year. There's this seal population on an island off the coast of Alaska, and shoot all this footage, bring it back, and let's see what we can do with it. And of course, eventually this becomes Seal Island, the very first of the true life adventure movies. It also goes on to win an Academy Award in 1948 for the best live action short subject. And again, launched that whole series of, animal live action films, which, if we're being completely honest here, is sort of where the path begins to Disney's Animal Kingdom theme park.
Right.
But yeah,
that's a long road.
So anyway, it's the summer in Alaska. It's one of the only times you can actually get to this island, and Walt wants to see what they're doing. And, and his daughter's out of school, for a couple of weeks yet. So, hey, let's go to Alaska. So, but the problem is
like anybody else.
Well, of course, but the only problem is where Alfred and Elma are shooting all of these, see the footage of the seals. It's on a place, a set of islands called the Pribilof Islands. It's off the shore. You can only get there by teeny tiny planes. In this case, a DC-3 Lincoln Bird. And so, they get up to Alaska, they board this plane, and, they take off for the island with a Russell Haverite, who's a colorful local character who also, flies bush planes. Now, please note that I said colorful local character, not skilled pilot, because, they take off and the weather immediately, it's Alaska. The weather gets miserable. And it's only supposed to be a 45-minute flight, and 2 hours in, they can't find the landing strip.
Oh, no.
And it's one of these things where, Walt is keeping it together, but it's like the fuel, they're running out of fuel.
All the calculations going off in his head about, okay, wait, this and that. And
yeah. And it's one of these things where, and to give Sharon some credit, she knew her dad was stressed, but didn't know what, because of course the adults aren't saying anything.
Right.
They're just flying in circles. And so, she's trying to calm him down by sort of smoothing his hair and rubbing his back and things like that. And so Eventually they, Walt and Russell sort of decide to roll the dice, and they literally dive down through the clouds, and there, just by sheer luck, is the airstrip. And they land, and, as they're deplaning, Walt gets on his knees and kisses the pavement, and it's only then does Sharon realize that, I think we might have been in trouble. But yeah, but because she was his buddy, rather than, again, battling with the other daughter, Walt, and again, she was his youngest. He was that much more indulgent. So, for like a minute and a half, she had a career as a model in her teens, and then she wanted to try her hand at acting, and you can actually see her in Walt Disney's 1957 release, Johnny Tremaine. She's in it in kind of a blink and you'll miss her role as the servant girl Dorcas. But
that's a great name.
It is. It's a great name. Anyway, by 59, rolls around. She's got the acting bug out of her system. She's 22 years old, and she meets a man, Robert Borgfeld Brown, who's an architect in L.A. They fall in love, and Walt signs off on the marriage so that they get married. I mean, again, she's just 22, but May 10th, 1959, and they are very happy for 7 years ago. And as I mentioned, Sharon, by this point, has been told, I mean, Walt and Lily, weren't, particularly mysterious about her being adopted. They were straightforward with her. Mm-hmm. But more to the point, they were clearly loving, caring people. And it's like she was their daughter who they just happened to adopt. And so Sharon felt strongly enough about sort of playing it forward that she and her husband, Robert, adopt a little girl, Victoria. But this was in January of 1966. And then in the fall of that year, everything kind of goes to hell. Robert,
the story really takes a turn.
Yeah, I mean, Robert in the fall of 66 is diagnosed with lung cancer. And then in that same window of time, Walt goes into the hospital for what he thinks is going to be the treatment of an old polo injury. And but while he's under the knife, the surgeons discover cancerous nodules and they remove most of his left lung. Yeah. And, again, in much the same way as what we were talking about with how people handled adoption back in the 60s, or excuse me, the 30s. In the 60s, when it came to cancer, this was really something you did, Matthew. You didn't tell the patient, but you told his family. Because the thinking
sometimes it still happens nowadays, but not to that extent.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I worked in a hospital for a spell, and I know of a couple occasions where it was, we won't tell the patient. We will kind of inform everybody else, but let's not tell the patient just yet.
Holy cow! Because in Walt's case, they pull Lillian and Roy, who you got to remember, Roy was getting ready to retire at this point.
Being the older brother, yeah.
Yeah, and they told the two of them that he's got 6 months to 2 years to live. And the thing is that Walt didn't make it 6 weeks. I mean, no. He died December 15th, 1966, and Sharon's husband, Robert, he lasted 8 months longer than that. He finally succumbed to lung cancer in September 14th, 1967. So picture that, in 1 8-month span, Sharon loses her dad and her husband. She's got a little girl who's barely 18 months old at this point, and she's a 30-year-old widow, who understandably has kind of lost her way.
I can't imagine going through something like that.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So, and understandably, she goes into mourning for a bit and turns to friends and family for comfort. And one of the family friends she turns to is William Lund. And it's understandable why she'd pivot to this, because her dad thought the world of William Lund. He was when they were searching for the land for Disneyland back in 1953. Buzz Price was the gentleman who actually, ran up and down, the length of what would eventually be the 5, and found, those walnut groves and those orange trees that eventually were the right place at the right price at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where Disneyland went. But one of the guys who he, worked hand in hand with was William Lund. And so, which is why now it's 1963 and Walt's getting serious about doing something on the East Coast. And he turns to William and just go to Florida. And William's the guy who does a lot of the discreet inquiries, around, Kissimmee and, and thereabouts, looking for large chunks of land that fit the formula that he and Buzz came up with back in 53. And the fact that, William could do this and be discreet and think on his feet, again, Walt loved this guy. And so that was why, when friends were sort of coming in to try to, help Sharon with her funk, William was there, and they formed a friendship that became something more. And, they eventually wed in 1969, and William, because he's, a big-hearted guy, he turns around and he adopts Victoria. And then in 1970, William and Sharon have 2 kids of their own, twins Radford and Michelle. And what's also nice about William is it wasn't that he helped make Walt's dream of building something in Florida, the giant park and resort there, happen. He then pivots, and the art school that Walt had set up in California, the CalArts, he served as president of CalArts for 72 to 75. And everything I've heard from friends and family, they were a very happy couple, leading a very charmed life. But, everything in life isn't a Disney movie. And
no. Was Sharon on the board at all at any point?
Well, yeah, she actually was a trustee at CalArts. Sharon, tried to be very, very supportive of people in the arts. But, she was kind of rocked that when William decided he didn't want to be married anymore. It was the 1970s and Est, and lots of people did lots of stupid things. William would eventually go on to marry 5 different women. But the irony is he and Sharon stayed really good friends. And oddly enough, it was the 5th marriage that finally stuck, But, here's Sharon, who's now the mother of 3 small children. And she's doing her damnedest to do exactly what her dad did and give these kids a normal childhood.
Right.
And that got interesting in 1984 when, as you mentioned, at the top of the segment, Ron Miller got forced out as the head of, the Walt Disney Company. Michael Eisner was brought in. And Disney family really doesn't like to talk about this. But the day after that happened, Lillian Disney, who's remarried a couple of times of her own at this point, by the way, shows up at Disneyland. And she literally asked to see the general manager. And it's like, yes, Mrs. Disney, what can we do for you? And it's like, I lent you all sorts of personal items for the display space in the Walt Disney Story. And it's like, yes, ma'am, you did. I want them back. And she,
wow.
Yeah, she, and they closed the attraction for the day, and they took every single piece, from she and Walt's life out, and they put it in a truck, and she took it with them, or with her. And what they then do was kind of interesting, in much the same way as what they've done with that recreation of Walt's office on the Disney lot right now. They had to go to private collectors and auction houses And thank goodness the archive had come through and photographed everything and cataloged everything, so they could find replacements, exact duplicates for a lot of the pieces she pulled.
So that Dave Smith was putting in overtime at that point.
Very much so. But the interesting thing is Michael Eisner was enough of a savvy politician, so to speak, to realize, wow, okay, we don't need the Disney family mad at us. And so he turns to Sharon and says, hey, I know we're the new guys, but we want continuity with the past. And obviously Ron and Diane want nothing to do with the company now. But would you join us as a member of board of the directors? And Sharon was like, sure, I'd love to help, help guide my dad's company into the future.
Okay.
And there's an upside and a downside to this. During Michael Eisner's tenure, the value of the Walt Disney Company increased 30-fold.
Yes.
And that meant that the blocks of stock that Sharon had owned that had made her simply wealthy. She was a wealthy woman in California and leading a comfortable life. She went from wealthy to insanely rich. And, and then in an especially cruel irony, given how she'd lost her dad and then lost her first husband, Robert Brown, Sharon was diagnosed with lung cancer and then succumbed to this condition in February of 1993. And then because we're talking about, at this point, I think it's $400 million. That's a ridiculous amount of money for any individual to have control over. So they set up the Sharon M. Lund Foundation. And to give the family credit, they have done some wonderful, sometimes crazily generous things with this money. Did you ever hear the story about the sheet music for Elton John's Candle in the Wind?
No.
It went up for auction in November of 2016. And Sharon's children, through the foundation, bid on and bought the sheet music, which had been signed by Elton John. Again, this is the original new version of the sheet music that honored Princess Diana. And they turned around and then donated it to the Princess Diana Museum, because it's like, well, you should have this,
Wow.
And and again, all of that money just because this was the right thing to do. Likewise, because Sharon was such a huge sponsor of the arts and believed so strongly in CalArts, they turned around and made a massive donation to CalArts. And CalArts, just to acknowledge this, turned around and renamed the part of the campus that's used to teach the students their choreography and the dance arts. They changed the name of that facility to the Sharon Disney Lund School of Dance. And this continued, that for example, the Lund Foundation made a $1 million gift to Ryman Arts, which is that nonprofit organization which does free arts education to talented teens in Orange County and Los Angeles County. And of course, that was set up to honor the memory of Disney legend Herbie Ryman, who again was, instrumental in the creation of Disneyland. He was the one that, got locked away in the lot with Walt himself over a weekend, to work on the design. And in fact, what's a great, kind of a great moment is that Walt's there on the lot with his daughters. And in fact, what they do on Saturdays is because, for example, this is, this is where they learn to ride their bikes. Because again, where they were living and walking way was a very steep hill and very busy traffic-wise. So it came time for the girls to learn how to ride their bikes. Walt threw the bikes in the back of the car and drove to the lot on a Saturday, and the girls drove up and, rode up and down, in front of the animation building and around the sound stages and all that. But yeah, right, here was Walt, you know, trying to spend Saturday with his daughters, but at the same time trying to make sure that Herbie would finish the map in time for Roy to get on a plane Monday morning and fly it out to New York to look for funding.
Yeah.
But long story short, Sharon, just like her dad, tried to keep her personal life private. And honestly, if you're in the Disney parks, I mean, everybody knows Diane, and largely because, again, of her work with the Disney Family Museum. Whereas Sharon, the only place you'll ever find her acknowledged is in the Magic Kingdom, Walt Disney World. She's got a window on Main Street. And in fact, it was installed just before the park opened in October of 71. And it reads, William and Sharon Lund Gallery, exhibiting only authentic works of art, genuine antiques collected by Victoria, Bradford, and Michelle.
Oh.
And look, as you and I mentioned a little while ago, again, it would be nice to report that Victoria, Bradford, and Michelle went on to have happy lives themselves. But again, the burden of having an incredibly famous grandfather, more to the point, having access to more money than any one person could spend in several lifetimes, led to some pretty tough things.
Yeah.
That's Matthew and I, out of respect to the family, won't get into that tonight.
No.
If you want to, I mean, Victoria died in 2002, and if you want to Google the Lunds, you can learn that story. It's not a particularly fun one.
No, very unfortunate for the family that but things happen, unfortunately, particularly when money gets involved.
They do. That's, again, money changes a lot of things. But again, with Sharon, I think the most important thing, if we're taking the 30,000-foot view here, is that Walt Disney and his wife Lily did this incredibly generous thing back in 36. In fact, that's the other thing. What I can't wrap my head around, Matthew, is, think about it. She's born in December of 36. They adopt her 2 weeks later. This is 1937. In less than 11 months' time, Walt is finishing Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It is the most high pressure, and they're running on him left and right. I mean, there's that famous story about they have to go with the, what a 2/3 done film and show it to the head of Bank of America, to get the money to complete the film.
Still getting rough pencil tests at that point.
Yeah, and it's just, and that's the exact moment when somebody calls him, we have a little girl. You can have her in 2 weeks. Yes or no? And and the fact that, and in that incredibly stressful time, financial pressures and time pressures and the potential of your career. And remember, this is all of Hollywood was calling Snow White Disney's folly.
Yeah, at any moment, someone's going to come knocking on the door and saying, "Okay, everyone out.
Yeah,
we're taking this building away from you."
And this is the time that the two of them opened their hearts to this little girl, that they create the room. And that's the thing. When Sharon talked of her childhood, it was this wonderful time with these wonderful people. That at no time was there any talk of the stress of running the studio. It just, he was daddy.
Yeah.
And he was a great dad. So
as much as he was a workaholic, he everything for him was family.
That's it, exactly. Well, again, that's, remember, we to get right down to it, we have Disneyland because on Daddy's Day, when he carved out time to spend time with his daughters, he felt they were more deserving of something genuinely special than the merry-go-round in Griffith Park.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, okay, so that's what I know about Sharon Disneyland. On the other hand, you reach out to Jim Corcus, could get an entirely different set of stories. So, it's give Jim a ring. So,
we'll see about that. But
okay.
I really appreciate this. This was fantastic. A lot more, even more information I was able to pull up. So your research, Jim, is always amazing. The stories that you're able to find. Thank you so much also for finding time in your busy schedule to come on my show, because you have, what are you up to, 10, 20 shows now that you do on the Jim Hill Network?
No, we've got 6 podcasts. We're talking about getting 2 more off the ground. If I do that, Nancy is going to stab me in the head. So we may just keep it 6. But no, as soon as you reached out and suggested this topic, I had to do it. It's again, you hit upon a part of Disney history that people don't really talk about in a weird sort of way. The company also doesn't talk about, and it's such a wonderful story. I wish it would wind up in the spotlight more often, because Sharon was a fascinating woman, and what Walt and Lilly did should be recognized and celebrated. So.
It's definitely something that's worth celebrating, and the type of company that Disney is, you would think would be on the forefront of, Walt was a great family man. He was adoptive father. He had his biological children. He did this for people, and just kind of builds up that character of who Walt really was, besides this idea man that just came up with these insane ideas, and how he structured and ran that company with such passion. But at the end of the day, when he got home, he was dad.
He was. But the interesting thing is, if you set your filters strong enough, you can come across, for example, think about one of the last films Walt worked on before he died, and it was Follow Me, Boys. And it's a Fred MacMurray film, but it's one of the very first times that Kurt Russell works for Disney Studios. But Kurt Russell is the young boy who's got in town, who's got an alcoholic father who eventually dies, and it's Fred MacMurray's character who opens his home and his heart and adopts this kid, who then goes on to become a pillar of the community. So it's like, face it, that's a script that came across Walt's desk, and he felt strongly about adoption being a positive thing. And so this is literally one of the very last things he works on. And it's a strong story, thread through that film.
Well, likewise, same thing on the animation. And now that you're mentioning that, is the Jungle Book.
Yep. So.
Which that also has to deal with the adoption of Mowgli into this wolf pack, and then same thing, Baloo bringing this completely different child, man cub, into his life.
And remember, that's the very last animated film he works on. So it's one of these things where, again, I don't want to pretend that I have any real insight into how Walt was thinking during this period of his life, but that can't be a coincidence, can it?
I don't think so. And Walt, you said that the doctors didn't tell him, but somehow Walt did end up knowing, because he took that farewell kind of tour through his studio as Mary Poppins is being produced and whatnot. I've heard from you mentioning before that you follow Doctor Who, so do I. It was like David Tennant at the end of his run, that he just makes this little go about to say goodbye to everyone that he's affected or been part of.
Yeah, that's a great episode. That's as much as I enjoyed Matt Smith as Doctor Who. Yeah, that's the bring the industrial size tissue, get strength box of tissue with you. That's a great send off, that episode.
Yeah, I was quite torn apart at the end of that one myself.
But on the other hand, yeah, here he is. He's at Disney. He's voicing Scrooge McDuck, so he's still with us.
That is bizarre to me, but it fits. That was one, I think, the hardest things for me into the new DuckTales.
almost a tailspin, but the DuckTales series is getting used to all these new voices.
Mm-hmm.
Not the animation, not the story side, just the voices aren't the same, and I understand why.
Mm-hmm.
But I still hear Scrooge McDuck, and I can't help to think David Tennant in all the works that he's done.
No. It's don't get me wrong. It's an interesting Venn diagram, but on the other hand, only David Tennant. That in fact, one of my favorite line readings out of all of the new DuckTales is, how Santa Claus is not allowed into McDuck Manor, and
Yes.
and it's like, and this is the only David Tennant could put the spin on it. That man knows what he did. So it's like, no, it's such a delight to have him in this role, and
He's taken it over. He does so well with it. He's reinvented the character into that Scroogey, grovelly type, the character that we saw in Mickey's Christmas Carol.
Mm-hmm. And again, no disrespect to Alan Young, who did wonderful work for years. And in fact, Alan was in the actors' home, and they still would go to him and bring the recording equipment there.
Yeah.
I want to say the very last thing he worked on was one of the brand new Mickey Mouse shorts. They only got a line or two of dialogue out of him, but that's Alan was Scrooge, right up until he couldn't be Scrooge
to the end. Yeah.
So, but hey, speaking of a delight, it was a genuine delight to be invited on the show tonight, and thank you again for suggesting this topic. No. Again, just appreciate the invitation, and we'll have to do this again sometime.
Absolutely, Jim. Let me tell my listeners, where can they find and hear you?
Oh dear Lord. Okay. Let's see.
Still got an hour.
Okay. Got a couple of podcasts. We got Disney Dish with Len Testa about the theme parks. We got Fine Tuning with Drew Taylor. That's when we discuss animation history and the current news. I do Universal Joint with Dustin Fuse because I think it's really, really important to pay attention to what the guys up the street are doing.
Indeed.
That's what Disney did after Universal opened Harry Potter, which is how we got Pandora, the World of Avatar, and Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. Anybody tells you anything else, they're kidding you.
Nope.
And speaking of Star Wars, I do the Looking at Lucasfilm podcast with Dan Z. We also do a Marvel themed podcast, Marvelous Disney, with Aaron Adams, and we're even doing a Disney merch podcast. I Want That with Michelle Valladolid, who is my ex-wife, and which again, when we were talking about the Sharon Disney London, the Bill Lund stuff of it, and how they got along even after they got divorced, it's like, wow, this turf seems very familiar for some reason.
Yeah. But I've talked to Michelle a few times online. She's good on her back, on her end.
She is a very colorful, very strongly opinionated person unto herself. Which is
yes, and I'm glad she's doing better.
I did the same thing here. So, but again, thanks for the invite, and like I said, let's do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Tim.
All right, take care.
Once again, I want to thank our special guest, Jim Hill, for joining us this week to talk about Sharon Disney. And like I said, she's kind of like the missing family member that everyone knew Walt had 2 daughters. Well, now we know a little bit more about her life. So, what kind of influence do you think Sharon actually had on Disney projects? Let us know on the Facebook group, facebook.com/Disney Marvels Podcast. Again, the Facebook group is facebook.com/Disney Marvels Podcast, or on the Twitter, which our handle is @Disney Marvels. The Twitter account is @Disney Marvels. You can also email the show with your answers or any suggestions for show topics, or just ideas or anything about the show, to DisneyMarvels@gmail.com. Again, the email address for the show is DisneyMarvels@gmail.com. Or you can even leave us a voice message through Anchor, the website, or through the app. I want to thank you for your time.
I know how very little time we all have nowadays, and how we struggle, especially now during the holidays, that everything is just even more complicated, it just tenfold, the time crunch that we have in our lives. So the fact that you're spending, this bit of time with me means so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I hate to ask this of you, but if you could just take an extra 2 minutes, go online, go to iTunes or wherever you're hearing this, and give the show a quick rating. It helps get the word out there. If you can't do that for whatever reason, just tell people about the show. Hey, check out this podcast I listen to, Disney Marvels. He reaches on some interesting topics, and all around, he seems like a nice enough guy. It's worth listening to. Let people know. The more, like I said in this episode, I've said in the past, Disney believed in a big family, and this is how we're all part of that Disney family. So growing the family is just. It just comes naturally to us as Disney people. And also, just while you're at it, also consider becoming a premium subscriber to the show. You can do this over at anchor.fm/Disney Marvels/support. Help keep the lights on. Help us be able to get stuff to do research for the movie reviews, and all that type of stuff. Your support goes a long way. And remember, this show is brought to you by listeners like you. Also, as you're planning your next Disney vacation or whatever vacation, Destinations with Character Travel is the Disney earmarked agency specialized in Disney cruises and resort vacations, and in the business of making your dreams come true. Made up of past cast members, annual pass holders, lifelong Disney fans, and world travels enthusiasts, they are the ones in the know regarding all aspects of your travel. Whether your travels are taking you to Disney parks, an ocean cruise, or a sunny resort stay, they have the destinations and service level to make your vacation truly a magical one. Find out how they take the stress and hassle out of your vacation so you can enjoy yourself. And that special promotion I told you about at the beginning, book a 5-night package with a 4-day hopper with them and get a free, yes, I said free $25 Disney gift card just by mentioning our podcast, Disney Marvels. That's free money for just saying, hey, I listen to Disney Marvels too, because they listen. Why shouldn't you? And they'll give you money just for going on vacation and saying you listen to a cool podcast. How crazy is that? Contact them now. www.destinationswithcharacter.com. The website again is www.destinationswithcharacter.com, or email them info@destinationswithcharacter.com, and their email address is info@destinationswithcharacter.com. Whatever you're facing out there nowadays, no matter how difficult, how impossible, how stressful things may seem, particularly now, don't give up. Really, it is worth it to fight, even when it doesn't seem like it. As tired as you are, as ready as you may be to give up, feel inside, look inside yourself. Don't worry about the other people. Look inside you, because there is a light in there. There is a light beyond the darkness, beyond the doubt. There's a light that is strong and ready to burn, and let it burn bright through you. Because you are worth it. You are amazing, you are beautiful, and you are worth it. And let everyone else know that. Don't ever give up. Don't ever give in. Be your own hero. Stand up and keep moving forward. I'd like to end this show with a quote from Walt Disney himself. Appropriately so. The idea of Disneyland came about when my daughters were very young, and Saturday was always Daddy's Day with the two daughters. So we started out and tried to go some places. Different things. And I'd take them to a merry-go-round, and I took them to different places, and I'd sit while they rode the merry-go-round and did all these things. Sit on a bench, eating peanuts.
I felt there should be something built where parents and children could have fun together. So that's how Disneyland started. Well, it took many years. It was a period of maybe 15 years developing. I started with many ideas, threw them away, started all over again, and eventually it evolved into what you see today at Disneyland. But it all started from a daddy with 2 daughters, wondering where he could take them, where he could have a little fun with them too. That's with Walt Disney, speaking of Diane and Sharon. Thank you again, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Jim, again for joining us, and I'll see you next time.